So next, we have an amazing panel of members of Congress from the United States, bipartisan panel, which will be, I think, a fascinating discussion, especially after what we've just heard from Ukrainian colleagues and also from the Vice President of the United States. Before they come up on stage for me to have a conversation with them, I'd like to introduce Danielle Burr, who is the Global Head of Public Affairs at McKinsey & Co., who is very kindly sponsoring this panel. So Danielle, please.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. As Jamil mentioned, I'm Danielle Burr. I am proudly the head of public affairs at McKinsey & Company, and so glad to be here with you all today. And thank you for dedicating your time to be here today. For those of you that might not be familiar, McKinsey is a global consultancy where we help institutions, large, small, public and private, solve some of the world's most complex problems. Since our founding, we have been helping the transatlantic problems between the U.S. and Europe strengthen security. One of the examples of the way that we do that is between some of the insight pieces that we put out. Most recently, the 2025 European, what are we calling it? The defense and security piece, which is right up here. We have our QR codes that allows for you to take a look at that. One of the ways that we like to insert ourselves into these dialogues is to put out these insight pieces, to let you all understand the facts, to allow the bipartisan lawmakers that we see here today have the access to the insights, have access to the facts so that they can come to the solutions that they need to help solve the complex problems that we all hear about here today. So delighted to be here, delighted to have the opportunity to be a foundational partner with Munich Security Conference, delighted to be a partner with Politico, and of course, our good friends at With Honor. So I'm gonna hand it back to Rye. Thank you, Rye.
Perfect. Thank you, Danielle. And here's our panel. Here they come. I think, was Politico going to roll some music for strutting here for the panel? It's the early afternoon. Here we go. Congressman Seth Moulton, come on down. All right. Great. Yes. Feel free to do dance moves. Great. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Many of you have been here. I'm Ry Barkott, the co-founder and CEO of With Honor. With Honor fights polarization in the United States Congress. Woo. And we do that by helping to support principled veterans and other servant leaders who are focused on actually being bipartisan in a time that it's really difficult to do that. But what we found in the past 7 years of this organization is that one of the key, most fertile areas to actually work across lines, and maybe one of the ones that's most significant, is in national security. And we've been pleased to work alongside the Four-Country Caucus, that's FOR Country Caucus, that you'll hear a little bit more about, and help pass over 250 laws over the last 6 years. And we continue to plan to continue to stay focused in that regard. So that's why we're here at MSC today. Thanks to Jamil and Politico for hosting this panel. I'm just going to say a quick word about each of the members of Congress, who I'm pleased to be able to also call friends over the years. All have been around since the beginning of this organization. Congressman Seth Moulton was maybe the first person, right up there with one of the first calls that I made. Seth and I served in the basic school together many years ago. We overlapped in the Marine Corps around the same period of time, from 2002 to 2006. He pulled more combat tours than I did. He pulled more combat tours than most pulled. For as an infantry officer in the Marines, and he has been a member of Congress and a real leader within the Four-Country Caucus. Delighted to have him here. Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan joined the caucus and became the founding vice chair. She is the only member of Congress that I'm aware of to have the distinction of serving in two particular forms, one in the military as an Air Force officer, and the other as a Teach for America alumnus. And one of the areas that we like to really focus on is expanding service opportunities for Americans. It's an area where the parties come together. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, former FBI agent, served in Ukraine. He is the co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which the Four-Country Caucus works alongside. He is also the co-chair of the Ukraine Caucus. And it was so moving to hear from our warfighters on the front lines I believe that he and Congressman Dan Crenshaw to his left were the first two members of Congress that I'm aware of who went to Ukraine after the illegal Russian invasion. They went in their own capacity. I don't know how much they informed the embassy or not, but they were there. They got into Ukraine, and they've been stalwarts for this fight for freedom. We'll hear more about that. In the case of Congressman Dan Crenshaw, I remember him running for Congress the first time. He literally ran. I believe he ran the entire way across his district in Texas, and he's still running and getting good stuff done. I commend to you his podcast, actually, that unpacks a bunch of issues, and I think I shared one of those with Jamil, our moderator. And with that, Jamil, over to you, sir.
You forgot Jason.
Oh my God.
I'm right here.
How could I forget? So Congressman Jason Crow is the reason why I am here. He introduced me to Benedict, the MSC CEO. He was the former co-chair of the Four Country Caucus. He has been around also since the beginning, and he is the only member of Congress to have had a perfect attendance in Four Country Caucus meetings in a former Congress.
Or something. I don't know.
Perfect. You haven't given me an award yet. So.
We can make one up.
It's okay. All right.
Rye's taking you for granted. You should be.
I know.
Be careful. This is. So thank you so much, Rye. I just want to say one more quick thing. The thing I love about his organization is that it stands for bipartisanship, for fighting against polarization. We at Politico are totally bipartisan, both in the United States and here in Europe, despite what some people might say. We are genuinely committed to bipartisanship and to covering politics through a non-ideological lens. We, I think, do a very good job of that almost all the time, and so With Honor works very, very well with us, and we're committed to the same ideals. And the military side of it, the fact that all of you have fought to defend democracy and to defend freedom and our way of life, I think is really admirable. It's something that my ancestors from the United States, from New Zealand, both did in World War I, World War II. And so even though I haven't fought in any wars, I did live in China for 22 years as a journalist, and it felt like I was fighting in the trenches some of that time. I want to ask you as a panel what your reaction was to the speech. It was, I think, a momentous speech, you could say, I think genuinely, that the Vice President just gave. I am assuming you all watched it, and I'd love to hear, just from each of you, just a quick reaction. What I've heard a lot of European reaction, as I'm based in Brussels, and I live in this part of the world, but I'd love to hear from you how you see what the Vice President just said. Maybe I'll start with you, Congressman Crenshaw.
Yeah.
I can imagine what the European reaction is. I mean, look, he had some strong words on European domestic politics, and I'm not sure I disagree with anything he said on the issues of censorship. I want to take a broader view of what the Trump administration's view is of European security as it pertains to Ukraine, especially because that's obviously the hottest topic there is at the moment. And I think President Trump has been very clear. He's been very clear in multiple interviews. Look, we can't have leverage over Putin if we take things off the table. The administration has been very clear about that. We're taking nothing off the table. We cannot have leverage over Putin in a negotiation if we abandon Ukraine. And he was asked, what does that mean? It means we don't abandon Ukraine. And so, you know, there's a lot of things said. There's a lot of things that can be parsed out. I think one has to look at the overall actual policy objectives of this administration. And you know, when it's all said and done, they're not that different from the last administration. The difference is there's a very clear-cut goal of achieving some kind of peace deal, which I think is in our benefit, whether it's especially an American interest, right? Because what do Americans want more than anything out of this? We want Putin to regret what he's done. That has a lot of implications to it. The implication, especially being that American deterrence prevails. It prevails for the next 50 years. Wars of conquest are a thing that happened pretty often before World War II. Wars of conquest meaning a bigger guy could take the smaller guy's stuff because he likes it. And we all know what world history was like before World War II. It was not good. That's the American interest in this. and obviously the Ukrainian interest of survival, and they're fighting valiantly to do that, and our support continues to be unwavering, I think.
Congressman
Yep.
Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, so my day started off reading an article out of the Wall Street Journal where Vice President Vance, I thought, used incredibly courageous, bold, strong language, strongest that I've seen yet, leading into these negotiations where he said that he will fight and will not tolerate anything but Ukrainian independent sovereignty, and that they are willing, the administration is willing to go to the mat on sanctions and even troops in Ukraine. That is the strongest language we've heard from anybody. And I applaud Vice President Vance for using such strong language. And to Dan's point, the question we always get asked is, what will the resolution, what does victory look like? And Dan said it best. The goal has to be for Vladimir Putin to regret his decision to invade Ukraine. That has to be the message. Because if the message is that you're going to be rewarded, if you're a dictator that invades a sovereign, freedom-loving democracy, that you will be rewarded, that will send a message to Xi Jinping, to Kim Jong-un, to the Ayatollah, to any other aspiring dictator across the planet. Victory means making these dictators regret the day that they stepped 1 foot over a country's border that is not theirs.
Well said. Congresswoman
I
Houlahan, you have one.
I
You
have a
mic.
microphone, but I can pass
Yeah,
over to
perfect,
Seth.
thank
You guys can try to guess what side of the aisle we're all from after this question. I was enormously disappointed by the speech. It was in no way, shape, or form what I would have hoped for from the Vice President of the United States of America. And why was that? He spent no time talking about Ukraine. He never once said the word Ukraine or Russia, as far as I remember. And rather, he spent the time, curiously enough, criticizing the European continent for the very things that we in the United States struggle with ourselves. And I felt like it was sort of a pot and kettle situation, where I felt like I wasn't really sure why that moment in our history, our collective history, needed to be about that subject. I felt like it needed to be about whatever the Wall Street Journal article you were talking about was. I feel like that's much more appropriate than the language that was here. So I walked away, to be honest, feeling, and I'm going to say it out loud, I felt like that I am sorry. I'm sorry for that speech for the continent of Europe, and I'm sorry for a significant population of America, maybe the majority of America, who I think will be disappointed with the tone of that speech.
Congressman Moulton.
Sure. Well, by the speech, I assume you're referring to the lecture that Europe just got from the Vice President. And, you know, look, we're here up on a bipartisan panel, and I think it's important to emphasize many of the things that we share in common in the places where we agree, not just the places where we differ. I agree with the Vice President that you should respect election results. I agree with the Vice President that you shouldn't jail your political opponents. I agree with the Vice President that you shouldn't censor the media. The problem is that this Vice President has been unwilling to even say publicly he respects the election results from 2020. Donald Trump said just yesterday that the members of the January 6th committee, his so-called political opponents, should be jailed. And they just kicked the AP out of the Pentagon. So what I heard was a very hypocritical lecture where, I mean, I agree with Dan, like there is a lot of things you could agree with in the speech, but the hypocrisy was unbelievable. I don't think I've ever heard a more hypocritical speech in my life. But I also think it's important what Dan said about our shared values for Ukraine. And we've heard some of that from the Vice President. We heard it yesterday. But talk about taking leverage off the table. When you say to Ukraine, you're not going to get all your territory back, when you say to Ukraine, you're not going to be a part of NATO before the negotiations even start, I mean, that's just unbelievably bad negotiating. And it's certainly taking leverage off the table.
Congressman Crow.
Well, a lot of ground has been covered already here. Yeah, and I associate myself with the remarks of Seth and Chrissy. And listen, we are a bipartisan veterans organization, and that doesn't mean that we agree all the time. In fact, bipartisanship means that we have pretty honest and pretty tough debates, and yet we still work together. I work with everybody up here, I legislate with everybody up here, and I disagree, and we battle at some point. But with that said, I was embarrassed by that speech, right? And for the reasons that Seth articulated. I think alliances and partnerships, which are one of our core strengths, the foundation of those should be what we focus on, our shared values and what we have in common, not policing or criticizing each other's domestic politics, particularly not policing each other's domestic politics when our own house is not in perfect order either, for the reasons that my colleagues also did a good job of articulating. So, but that said, there's been a lot of things that I have not liked, and I've frankly been embarrassed by that have happened in the last 6 weeks. But it could have been more damaging, right? There were no policy pronouncements and big things that locked us in, or that locked the alliance in, that took things off the table, right? So I do think a lot of things still do remain on the table, and I do think there's room to maneuver, and frankly, in some ways, that was kind of a sigh of relief that nothing happened that couldn't be walked back and couldn't be negotiated.
If I could just finish this by saying there's one thing that is really valuable to me about the people who sit on the stage with me. When I ended this with the speech and was pretty upset, Dan said, what did you think? And I told him a little bit, and he said, don't feel like you have to hold back. Tell me what you really think. And I appreciated that, and I value that. So thank you for that.
So this moment in history is obviously more polarized, not just in the United States, frankly, but across the world. In most democracies, it's a truly polarizing moment. But the fact that you guys are sitting up here together, and the fact that you work together through your shared service and work to bring the two parties in America together, it must be tough. And so I want to ask, how do you do it? And what are the sort of main strategies you have to remain civil and to try to get legislation through that's genuinely bipartisan? And a little bit for all of you, what are the main topics where you see the most overlap between the two parties at the moment?
I had to give a talk to incoming freshmen at orientation recently, and one of the rules I gave them is the elevator rule. Try not to tweet something that you don't want to. Try not to tweet something at someone that you might share an elevator with later that day.
They've been in the military, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a foxhole rule.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good rule, and I've learned it over time. I mean, you know who my office neighbor is right now? AOC. So I have to walk past all those Post-it notes every day to get to my office. And but it's been a long time since we tweeted at each other. I think a lot more bipartisanship happens in Congress than people realize. The vast majority of bills that we even pass out of the House are bipartisan. Suspension bills. There are things we work on. The how is a bit more complicated. Sometimes it happens in a caucus setting. A lot of times it happens via committee. If you want, people ask, how do you find the right Democrat to work with? Well, it depends on what committee they're on. It depends on their personality. It depends on a number of things. Sometimes it depends on the caucus. That's helpful. Me and Chrissy worked on FISA reform together to target the cartels. And we both had large elements of our own party voting against that, which is inexplicable. But we can talk about FISA all day. But it happens opportunistically as well, and it happens a lot more, I think, than maybe people give Congress credit for.
I want him to give it to you. That's more bipartisan. No, I'm just.
Yeah, I don't think it's complicated. The key to success in any relationship in our lives, whether they be our personal relationships, our business relationships, any relationship in our lives, is to not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Take 80% of something over 100% of nothing. You come to the center. You build consensus. You see the world through the other person's eyes. Understand that all of our paradigms begin based on our own personal life experiences, which are very different than other people's lives experiences. That's the important thing. And tone matters. Your language is very important. And there's never been a single business challenge that's been resolved by people screaming at each other over the boardroom table. There's never been a family crisis that's ever been solved by people screaming at each other across the kitchen table. So why, pray tell, would we take any other approach to government? I think that's very, very important. We're all going to disagree on different policies. We can choose to point out that which we don't like, or we can highlight the things that we do. I came here last year. Then Vice President Kamala Harris spoke. And I found that which I agreed with her speech, even though we disagree on an awful lot, that which I agreed on, and I complimented her over Twitter. I put a tweet out, much to the chagrin of many, many people that I know, because I think it's important that we set that tone. That when we're overseas, we are one country, we are one NATO, and that we have to find areas where we see positive. The disagreements are going to be there. So me and
Sorry, go ahead.
Me and even this administration have a lot of differences. Dan has a lot of differences with the administration. If we want the best outcome, which I do for Ukraine, Ukraine is a hill I will die on, because I think it is so existential that we get this right. So I am taking the approach that we get more bees with honey. So I want to try to use my persuasion with the administration to try to compliment them on what they're doing right, steer them in the direction that I want them to go in, because we have to get this right for the sake of these people and their families who fought on the front lines, and learn from the lessons of the past. September 1st in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, there were a lot of people across the world, Neville Chamberlain being the most notorious, saying, we don't want to provoke, we don't want to escalate regional conflicts. And a problem that could have been nipped in the bud early, because it was not, turned out to be the costliest and deadliest war in world history. In the prior administration, I wanted to pull my hair out with some of the decisions that were made. There were several of us, including Chairman Meeks at the time, Chairman McCall, I should say, Ranking Member Meeks, who came here, we came to the Polish side of the border, begging, with Secretary Blinken here, begging for MiG-29s, TB-2 drones, S-300 surface-to-air missiles, all Soviet technology. And we were told it's going to be too provocative. Now, just before January, we're giving F-16 fighter jets, ATACMS, authority to go into Russia, and Patriot battery missiles, our most sensitive technology. Imagine if we would have given all of that equipment on day one. We'd be looking at a very, very different trajectory. So when it comes to the topic of Ukraine, which I care deeply about, that's why I chose on day one to chair that caucus, I think both parties have gotten it wrong. I really have. But it's never too late, and we're going to be doing our job with this administration to make sure we have a good outcome for you all.
I just want to say, last year I listened to you. We met briefly, but I've listened to you speak. There was a dinner with Pompeo, you remember, and you spoke, and it was fascinating. I learned a lot about how not just the sort of attitudes of Congress towards Ukraine and the battle, but how it actually really works in D.C. Sitting here in Munich, I learned a lot from that. So thank you for that. And how long were you in Ukraine again when you were at the FBI?
I was back and forth for several years.
Back for several years, that's right.
I want to jump in and go next just because I want to key off of two things that Brian said. First of all, he commented on Vice President Harris's speech, and I listened to her speech 2 years ago, and I walked out of that and said that was a terrible speech. So
I was there too. I remember that speech.
So it's okay to be a bipartisan critic, and in fact, the definition of political courage is not criticizing the other party; it's being willing to criticize your own, and that's hard to do in today's Congress. But if you hear, I think, some of the dialogue on this panel, it's about how we're able to cross the aisle by being willing to go against our own party. Like the FISA bill that Dan was talking about, where there were a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans who were opposed to that legislation. The other thing that Brian talked about is just how you develop these relationships. And I think actually the foundation of a relationship is trust. And oftentimes you develop trust, or you start developing trust, just by identifying some shared experiences, things that you can relate to. You start to get to know someone by being able to relate to them. Now, we had a meeting with the German defense minister this morning, and I was sitting next to Dan, and I disagreed with some of his comments. And so we talked afterwards. There are a lot of members of Congress that I just wouldn't even bother talking to, but I respect Dan because of his service and because of his experience, some of which I shared. And so, like, to me, Dan's someone that's worth talking to. And I think over the course of 3 minutes of dialogue, we kind of came to some agreement on, what we saw, where we agreed and where we disagreed, probably more where we agreed on what the German defense minister had to say. And that shared experience really anchors us in the four-country caucus. And I think that's really a key to why it works.
So we've talked about Ukraine, and we've talked about your shared military service and mutual respect for each other, which is impressive to see. Are there other areas where you think there can be more bipartisan, like what are the sort of other key areas where bipartisan kind of views?
You mean topics or subjects?
Topics. I mean topics.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of China because that's the one that I...
Well, certainly there is still pretty strong bipartisan agreement about China. I'll give this to you because I'm already mic'd up. What I kind of wanted to contribute, the original question was about how do you get things done?
Yeah.
And I think there's several different ways. One, and many of them have been touched on, one is that you have relationships with people, and two is you develop trust with people. And similar to what you guys were saying, when President Biden was president, I was pushing back on him not doing enough fast enough. I pushed back on Afghanistan. I did all of the things that I could uncomfortably from my side to make sure that happened. And I hope that earned respect and trust from my community as well as from this stage. But I would also say that the way things get done is two ways: randomly, like a lightning bolt moment, but it's because you have relationships, and also with really hard, very focused work over years and years of time. One thing that we're working on bipartisanly, not with members who are on this stage, but is paid family leave and paid medical leave. This is something that has been vexing the United States for its entire history, and for the last 30 years, we haven't really moved the needle on this. This is an opportunity, I think, especially in a environment such as this, where it's a very fragile majority-minority kind of a thing, where both parties are pro-family, both parties want to support the economy and people to have children and to be able to be successful. And Representative Stephanie Bice, Republican from Oklahoma, and I have worked together for now coming up on 3 years to try to create the legislative solutions for that. That's the deliberate method. And I'm starting to hear people say that this is something that may actually have traction. The random one is we care about paid leave. I put a bill forward on the NDAA that sold a bunch of our tungsten out of our strategic reserves, and it created a pay for, it created money. And with that pay for, the idea was brought forward to use that for paid leave for federal employees. Turns out Ivanka Trump, and this was back in Trump's first term, really likes paid leave. And so she was instrumental in helping get that tungsten, the pay for, to be able to help create the beginnings of paid leave for 2.1 million federal employees. And that's just magic. That's critical minerals meet paid leave. It's crazy.
American solution.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Congressman Crow.
Yeah. Well, I'm playing cleanup, so there's not more that I can't say that hasn't already been addressed by the other panelists. I think maybe the only other additional piece is a common understanding by our bipartisan group about the environment in which we are operating. And I think that is maybe a shared view. Right? I think we understand that there's a convergence of forces at play, and that we are swimming upstream of those forces and having to address them together. Right? Substantively, there's a convergence of mass migration pressures on all of our societies, and this is something that everybody in this room can share, and the implications of that politically. We're still all dealing with the fallout from the pandemic, which has had cultural and societal implications on our politics and our societies, and economic stagnation, which we're all still dealing with as well. So all of those things are happening, and then they're all happening within a political environment of disaggregated media, of social media, of extremism coming from multiple forms. So all of those things coming together, and what it requires is that we be willing to take heat from every direction, right? To be somebody who's willing to work in a bipartisan way means that at any given moment, by the way that I speak, the way I communicate, and the way that I legislate, I will be taking heat from my left and from my right and from my back and from my front. Because I either won't be going far enough for my base, or I'll be going too far for the folks who disagree with me. and you just have to be willing to do that. And I think that's the definition of leadership that we learned in our service, is leaders don't just follow public sentiment and will and put their finger up to see where the wind is blowing. You help shape sentiment and will and create coalitions around issues, and that's what I think we are trying to do.
I'm going to ask you a very quick question, but then I'm going to actually, to stop you having to do cleanup, I'm going to start with you with the next topic. But I wanted to ask you, who decides that you that you get to work in the office next to AOC? Is that is that something is it a random
My neighbor
lottery?
is Nancy Mace.
Is it a random lottery, or is someone like an evil sort of plotter behind? I just don't, speaking as a naive person who's not worked in Washington, and is that intentional? Is that meant to try to make you more or less bipartisan?
It's kind of a boring answer. It's random.
I was just imagining this elf in the little.
There's more to it, but it's honestly it's boring.
Basically.
I can tell you how we choose offices, but I think that's
No, just random. Okay.
Yeah, but since I have the microphone, maybe I'll say another topic that I think we can work on in a bipartisan fashion. And again, this is something Chrissy and I have worked on is cartels. So we're talking about this is a conference about European security, but in America, there's a lot of bipartisanship and realization from your populist right, who's don't deploy anyone anywhere, isolationist, to the populist left, who's isolationist, to your moderate Democrat and moderate Republican. Everybody agrees there is a problem at our southern border. There is an insurgency inside Mexico. That's a problem for the Mexicans. It is a problem for us. And we've done a lot of work on I've led the cartel task force. Again, Chrissy was a part of that. And we passed legislation that allows FISA authorization to target them. There's a lot more that can be done there. And there's a lot more that I think will be done because there's a lot of agreement as long as we go about it the right way. And that means being inclusive of others, and also realizing that there's a difference between proclamating an idea, getting it voted on, getting a headline written. There's a difference between that and a lawmaking exercise. And when it comes to some of these issues, they're just too important not to be a lawmaking exercise. And the way our system works, it's very different from the parliamentary systems of all the countries represented here. We have some serious checks and balances, and you need 60 votes in the Senate unless you're doing reconciliation. Then it becomes a partisan exercise. We're not going to talk about that today. But you need 60 votes in the Senate if you want to target the cartels, and that's so it needs to be a lawmaking exercise. You need to have buy-in from the other side, and we plan on doing that. My hope is we end up with a select committee on cartels because they're one of the most dangerous insurgencies / paramilitaries in the world.
Yeah, Dan just referenced isolationists on the left and isolationists on the right, and I think it's worth saying that probably the vast majority of people at the Munich Security Conference agree with where Democrats and Republicans are in the center in America. I mean, that's where the national security consensus tends to be on committees like the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee. The moderates, whether they be in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, are not in the ascendancy right now. We're not the cool guys. We're not the people raising a lot of money.
You're cool, Seth.
I try to be. I've never been. Been trying all my life, Jason.
Should have been a seal.
You're not the one. What's that?
You could have been a seal.
Shots fired.
Didn't even.
Or a rating.
And so, in some ways, that highlights why this caucus and the work that we do together as fellow veterans is all the more important, because we need to build political capital in the center, because it's not where there's naturally a lot of political capital right now. You asked about offices. I was on did a CNN interview or something with a Republican colleague because we were working on a gun reform bill together. Very, very contentious issue. And in the commercial break before the interview, the host said, "So what's the deal? What are you guys, like high school buddies, or you have lockers next to each other in the gym or something? Like, why do you even..." And the answer is, yeah, our lockers are next to each other in the gym, and that's how we got started talking about this. And so the point is that some of this is serendipitous, and it would be really wise for the masters of Congress or the members of Congress to figure out more ways to have these serendipitous moments. I often find that Washington is so polarized. You can't do anything in Washington that's really bipartisan, with very, very few exceptions every month, let alone every day. that oftentimes it's actually at places like this, when you get to travel overseas on a Codel and you find common purpose in advancing America's national security interests. It's often in environments like this where you have the conversations across the aisle that are the seeds of working together.
That's great. Congressman Crow, I'd like to start with you to reverse the cleanup operation. What about Doge? I'm really,
If you can go, we can revert back that way if you want.
No, let's not done that.
I'm good with it.
I think, for us, it is fascinating, like really fascinating. For outsiders watching from Europe, I mean, I'm an American citizen. I've experienced a little bit American bureaucracy. The first time I had to go get my social security number, I tried to get a driver's license. I'm still registered. I lived in America the last time was 20 years ago, and I'm still registered in this weird place in Colorado. I can't change it. The American government...
Colorado is not going to let you go.
No, never. It's a wonderful place. I think I voted for you. Maybe, I don't remember. The thing that I observe as an outsider is the American government, and governments in many democracies, frankly, is broken. And it does need a really serious overhaul.
Yep.
And I'm just fascinated to hear from the Democrats where you think Doge can make a real difference. And then maybe hear from the Republicans your criticism of Doge. But let's start with the Democrats and praise Doge for me and tell me why it's going to
Well, I'm not going to do that. Listen, Doge, you're not wrong in that Doge is responding to a real problem. Right? And that problem being that there are many functions of government that are not working the way they should, that are not delivering in the way that they should in an efficient way, in a way that is being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And people see it, right? They see it in their everyday lives, right? It takes sometimes 10 years to complete a bridge project. I mean, give me a break. You drive past and you see a bridge under construction for 10 years, and then the government says, this is funded by our taxpayer dollars. And it just makes people more pissed off, is all it does, right? And they should be pissed off. So there's a lot of things like that. So that is what it's in response to. I think it's the wrong remedy. And I think it is largely a theatrical and performative response to that's picking small little examples out of the air and then pretending that those examples are policy writ large and are illustrative of the larger response in government and how government works. That is not largely true, right? And picking on the small people, right, like USAID, and just saying we're going to make across-the-board cuts to USAID and do our humanitarian, when that actually is bad for us economically, it's bad for our national security, it's bad for our moral standing, it's bad for American leadership. It's not the right way to do it. Now, there are good things to focus on, and if Doge wants to focus on, for example, defense and procurement and contracting reform, which actually is one of the most bipartisan issues in Congress, and I think probably everybody on this stage would be like, yes, our contracting system is broken, and the way that we buy and develop big systems is inefficient, it's slow, it's buying the wrong stuff at the wrong time, and it's wasting tens of billions of taxpayer dollars. I'd be perfectly willing to do that, and there's actually bipartisan efforts, and there have been working groups that many people on this platform have served in and led, actually, to focus on that. So recognizing that the angst is real, that the need for reform and efficiency is real within certain areas, but then figuring out what is the tailored, focused, surgical remedy to that can get bipartisan support, that is not theatrical and will not do damage to us, is the task before us.
I mean, yes, everyone knows government isn't efficient. And to just take another perspective on exactly what Jason just said, I think a big problem for Democrats is that we are supposedly the party of defending government, and yet we've done nothing to really reform government and to make it more efficient. But I think the question about Doge is whether the approach that they are taking, as Jason said, will be effective or actually might be just utterly detrimental. Because it seems to me what they're doing is not just making government more efficient, but just eviscerating it. making it go away. And there's this, this common, conservative view, the conservative American who doesn't want government involved in his life and in any way, and says, get the government to take their hands off my Social Security check. Okay, well, this is a government program, right? And so there is a degree to which, the average American doesn't understand the role that government has in their lives. I think it's very difficult to explain the role that USAID plays for our national security. And yet, when we had some briefings on the Armed Services Committee just this past week, and we asked some of the COCOM commanders, is USAID important? They said, absolutely. So the question is, will DOGE be effective, and what is the democratic alternative? Because there doesn't exist a democratic alternative today. One other comment. When DOGE goes out and says, we're going to make government efficient by just cutting out a bunch of government employees, and they offer this buyout offer, let me just ask this one question. Who takes the buyout offer? It's all the people with better options. I had 2 friends call and ask my personal advice, do you think I should take this or not? And both of them are parrying offers on Wall Street, right? So we want the old, tired government employee who's super lazy and that's a little bit of a trope, but there's probably some truth to it. We all know that. That's the person we want to retire. That's not the person that Elon Musk is going to get to retire. And so I think that the danger here is that the end result of DOGE is a government that's actually less efficient, less effective, and doesn't deliver the things that we need for the American people. But shame on Democrats for not having an alternative.
Totally ignored my instructions, but that's okay. Carry on.
I don't know what your instructions were because I wasn't listening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
how Congress works.
This is how polarization gets.
No, actually, what I would say is these guys are accurate. DOGE is answering a problem that exists. There is inefficiencies. There's definitely something that needs to be done, and we can be better than we are. All large systems are like that. I'm a systems engineer. I was a procurement officer and contract manager and engineer in the military, so I do understand that part too. And I guess what I would say is the methodology that we are using by having an Elon Musk and 2019 to 25-year-olds, now I think it's about 40, kind of sweep in and do what amounts to a scan of all the data, Control F, looking for things that are provocative that will ping on everybody's nerves so that they can then hold it up and say, look, here's the waste, here's the fraud, here's the problem. And then at the same time, have just total chaos in all different aspects of our country, all different organizations. Not to mention the fact that these are people who have literally no training in these systems. They have no background or security check clearances. They've been given them, but they have no background or security check clearances. This is not how this is supposed to work. How it should work is Congress. How it should work is the Constitution. And so that, I think, is what I'm most concerned about. And what I will end by saying is, and because I have relationships with people who are some who are here on this stage and also some who are home in Washington, I think it's important that we have these conversations and try to hear what each other is saying. And I know that my colleagues have different opinions, but that's why I value their opinions, because they clearly see a need and a solution that I don't see.
And just to be fair, there are a lot of Democrats who would sit up here and just say, everything's fine. We're not saying that at all. We're saying there is a problem that needs to be fixed.
I'll give you both sides of it. How's that? I think the good thing is we're having conversations in a much more serious way on a topic that we have not had in my lifetime in politics that need to be had. If getting back to my earlier comment about bipartisanship, about businesses and families, if our businesses and our families manage their budget the same way the government does, every single family and every single business would be bankrupt. That is a fact. So we are having substantive, serious conversations about things that should have been had a long time ago. That's a good thing. And by the way, I think a big driver of that is 49 out of 50 states in America have a balanced budget amendment. We do not have that at the federal level. So we could all be Santa Claus and give everything away and never have to answer that tough question like families do and businesses do. That needs a change. We have to pass a balanced budget amendment. It's common sense, makes sense to the states. It's certainly the case in our state in Pennsylvania and so many states across the country. I think we just got to be really careful about overgeneralizing this or anything when we still are not clear on what the facts are and the law is untested. Both are which are true here. So I'm a former FBI agent. I've been working very closely with a lot of my former colleagues in the Bureau to get my arms around what exactly is going on there, to get the facts, because that's the first thing you need. And we have an area of untested law, specifically a bill that was passed in 1962. It's Title 18, Section 202. It created this brand new class of government employee called SGEs, or Special Government Employees. It's been used by every single president since 1962 to the tune of thousands of people, every administration. But it's never been used in this manner by someone with the, the wealth and the popularity, I guess you would say. Not necessarily good or bad, but he's a very known figure, Elon, who had gone about this way of using that position, right? It's sort of the shock and awe approach to government auditing. So we need to get the facts. We need to get clarity on this law. And if the facts are being done in compliance with the law, and the law is not being used in the way that was consistent with the intent of whoever wrote that bill in 1962, then we revisit the law. If the facts show that the law is being violated, then we get to enforcement. But I think that's the cleanest and most intellectually honest way to approach this. What you don't hear a lot of people complaining about, DOJ, is what they're finding, right? Or at least complaining about, the fixes that we need from what they're finding, because they're finding some pretty damning things. And I think the public should learn about that.
I'll play cleanup.
Yeah, cleanup time.
Yeah, so I mean, when DOJ was originally envisioned, I mean, my skepticism stemmed from the notion that a businessman can fix a bureaucracy, because these are necessarily apples and oranges. A business is more efficient because it's profit-driven, which means you could control for bias very easily. The mission of a bureaucracy is to help people. But of course, we have very different ideas, even on this panel, of what it means to help people. Therefore, you have to control for that bias. Some would call that bias the deep state. And the way you control for that is by wrapping those bureaucrats in red tape, which makes them necessarily inefficient. So that tension is always there. And so I was curious, what DOJ was going to do. Were they going to rehash a bunch of reports that old think tanks had already done, that legislation that has already been had to make government more efficient, or shrink it, or shrink the role of it? There's a difference between shrinking size and shrinking the role. And I got to say, I've actually been impressed with the niche that they've actually found, which is very much data analytics. So you find these young software engineers. Why are you bringing in young software engineers? They don't know anything about USAID or Social Security as a program. But what's been interesting is watching what they've done, which is not something our government has ever done, which is actually just scrape data and ask some very basic questions. Now, in US, these are vastly different categories. But it should be said, first of all, Elon Musk is doing all of this at the pleasure of the president. President Trump can pick anybody he wants to manage this particular program within the executive branch. I'm a firm believer that the head of the executive branch can manage the executive branch. They cannot fire any of our employees. It should also be said that we can fire our employees today without asking any questions. The federal government, the executive branch, cannot do that. I don't like that. I think that's kind of crazy. I think it should be easier to fire people who are not doing their jobs well. On USAID, Secretary Rubio has made it very clear we're not getting rid of USAID, and there are programs that are indeed vital for our national security and our national interests. They're going line by line, of course. They should be going line by line, whether it's Elon Musk doing it in this very public manner, or whether it's some staffers at the White House who would be doing it anyway. And then they're going through things like Social Security, but they're finding some pretty common sense. And this is where I've been impressed on this niche that they've found, which can only be done by data analytics. If you're 150 years old, why are you getting a Social Security check? There's a really good chance that you're dead. Why are people getting Social Security checks that don't have Social Security numbers? So this is a data problem, it seems, because look, we all know, we've all been in the military. We all know very well how poorly records can be kept, how outdated these systems are. And if it takes some tech nerds to figure that out, I'm not so sure I see that as a bad thing. In the end, the policy that comes out of that is not from Elon Musk. And I think that's what's been said. and been popularized in the media. Oh, it's Elon Musk is doing this. No. He worked for President Trump. And he's part of the executive branch, and President Trump is head of the executive branch, full stop. The policies that come out of that will be the policies that come out of that, but they won't be Elon Musk's policies. They will be the president's policies. And then we can argue about whether those are good or not, but indeed, they are the president's.
All right. Well, we're running out of time. I just want to thank you guys. I mean, I really think it's impressive to see that people with obviously different political viewpoints and different constituencies that you represent, different political perspectives can get together through your shared service, through your mutual respect, which I can feel and I admire. So I just wanted to thank you really for coming and for joining us at the Politico Pub. You're welcome to use this space, as is everyone. Tomorrow from 9:30 till 11, and on Sunday from 9:30 till like 1 o'clock. You can have beers, wines, whatever you want. You can come. You can come through. There's food. You can do meetings here. Whatever.
They want to get us drunk and then ask us questions.
Exactly.
On the record. That's what
Every third person.
We'll be playing board games later tonight.
Yeah. Just wait for 1 second. I think Svetlana would like to just say a quick thank you to you. I might give you that microphone and you can say something.
Sasha, I just wanted to...
Sasha.
No, I just wanted to thank every one of you from the Ukrainian people, not from the Ukrainian parliament, but from the Ukrainian people, because I know how much each one of you has done. I remember Brian was like 3 or 4 days of war when we had dinner. You took me to dinner, and you will explain to me how the politics work and what I have to say. And I remember Jason asking you like 20, 30 times to your cabinet, and every time you would take a meeting, even if it's 15 minutes, and I'm like, okay, cut it short. What do you need? Tell me what you need this time. And I've never heard a word escalation from any one of you. And I'm really grateful. And I think Seth was the first person who said the Kyiv is not going to go down. Before actually it happened, before the invasion, because everybody was telling 24, 72 hours, he didn't believe that. And Ukrainian roots, Chrissy, because I remember coming to you and you said, well, I have Ukrainian roots from Lviv, and I just couldn't believe that. So, and thank you so much for standing up for us in the Intel Committee and helping us and fighting for that. And Dan, and I just wanted to thank every one of you because you're heroes for us, fighting that war, to get us the stuff, to get us HIMARS, NASAMS, air defense, and everything. And I know that if not your group, we would not be where we are now, honestly. So thank you.
Thank you.